Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and have we got a super fun episode for you today that is all about the importance of creating an experience as a leader. Yes, of course, you want to create an experience for your customers and your clients, but have you thought about creating an experience for your employees? Now, if you're intrigued by that, or you're wondering, what does that mean? What does it look like? Stand by, because you're going to find out from today's guest, who spent a decade with Cirque du Soleil. So she's kind of an expert on creating experiences. So let me tell you a little bit about her amazing story, and then we'll jump into our conversation. My guest today is Caroline Maley, and she is an experience strategist helping businesses create exceptional experiences for their employees and their guests through inspiring workshops, speaking, and one-on-one consulting. She spent the last 10 years on tour with Cirque du Soleil, running front of house departments in 17 different countries and over 50 different cities worldwide. Her love for leading young, passionate teams led her to devise and roll out a successful employee development program for touring employees, as well as countless standalone leadership workshops for Cirque du Soleil. She leads her brand with the mindset that exceptional employee experiences will create exceptional guest experiences, and combined, that results in one incredible brand. Caroline is a full-time traveler and is currently based in Montenegro. How cool. We're talking to her while she's there right now. She hosts the Experience Creators podcast on YouTube, and her mantra is, one great experience can change someone's world. Oh, I love it. So I am so excited to have Caroline here today, and for you as my listeners to hear her story and learn from her. So welcome, Caroline. It is so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. It just got me fired up. I'm ready to go.
I love it. That's what we like on the Positive Leadership Movement, fired up and ready to go. So just to get us started, because longtime listeners know this, you may have listened to the podcast yourself. I always start out by asking about your definition of positive leadership, because everyone has a slightly different way that they look at this, that they talk about it, that they implement it. And so I always want our listeners to have a sense of where the guest is coming from. So Caroline, for you, what is your personal definition of positive leadership?
I think you touched on it in the introduction a little bit, and I kind of lead all of my work through that mantra of one great experience has the potential to change someone's world. And I coined that actually from, I don't know if you know the movie School of Rock with Jack Black, but at the end he says, one great rock show can change the world. And I don't know, I just randomly thought of that one day and thought about how I can apply that to experiences. And so I really take that mantra of one great experience has the potential to change someone's world. I mean, this is applicable to our everyday lives and the people we interact with. But when I think about leadership and what it means to be a great leader, I really think of it from an experiential point of view. You know, we are spending such a huge part of our lives working, and now it's not just about the paycheck. It's not just about, you know, the skills. It's really that purpose-driven motivation. And so how can we as leaders create incredible experiences for those people that are part of our tribe, that are part of our team? And of course, that means something different for everybody, but that's part of my work. That's what I help businesses. That's what I help other leaders like me do, is try and uncover what is your unique experience that you're providing for your employees. Because as you mentioned in that introduction, if you can create an exceptional environment for them, then that is going to lead to incredible customer service, guest experience. And then of course that will then mean an incredible brand long term. And of course, that's what we're all trying to achieve in our businesses. So for me, it's about the experience that you're creating for your team, for your tribe.
I love that. I absolutely love it. And you have such a, I think, a unique lens that you're putting on this. So tell us a little bit more, though. Help us understand what you mean by experience, because I can imagine, you know, some people listening, if they've ever seen a Cirque du Soleil show or even a poster for it, I mean, it is a spectacle. And for those of you listeners out there who maybe have not heard of Cirque du Soleil, it is an amazing entertainment company. They put on multiple shows where you have acrobats and aerialists, and it is so visually stimulating. It is unbelievable, the skill and talent of the people that are in these shows. And so when you think Cirque du Soleil and experience, you think, woo, something huge and elaborate, like this big show. But I don't think it has to be that way, right? So tell us what you mean by experience. Maybe give us a few examples, Caroline.
Yeah, so let's take Cirque du Soleil as the example. Everybody knows when they buy a ticket to Cirque du Soleil that they are going to an incredible show. It's pretty much guaranteed, right? No matter where you are in the world, no matter what show that you see. And that's why you buy your ticket. You buy your ticket to go and see the show. However, around that main event, around that 2-hour period, there's a lot of other things that happen that contributes to the experience that you have at Cirque du Soleil. You know, you go through the parking, you go through security, maybe you pick up your ticket at the box office, maybe you buy some food and beverage from the bars, you might buy a t-shirt, you use the bathrooms. Like there's this myriad of different touch points that happen all around the show. And if Cirque du Soleil, for example, was to only focus on the show and they weren't to focus or prioritize on any of those other elements that were around the show, yes, your experience as the guest would be incredible, of course, because you're watching the show, but there are so many elements of that you probably would have hated, that you would have been extremely frustrated with, that you would have completely disconnected with the brand and thought maybe afterwards, oh yeah, the show was great, but oh my gosh, I had to line up for 30 minutes. I couldn't get in the parking, this and that. And so if we use that example, and when we're looking at our teams and employees, yes, they have that one main role. Maybe you have that one main kind of interaction with them. But how are you contributing to all those other touch points that happen around that main event or that main show, if you were to take that in the workplace sense? And how can you really create impact in those areas? And one area that I discuss when I really focus on the journey of the guest within your experience is around, there's a defining moment for everyone. And if you, again, take the show of Cirque du Soleil, there's probably that one main like aha moment, or that like, that catches your breath, and or that you're like, oh my gosh, like you think they're going to fall or something incredible happens. However, that may not be the most memorable, impactful moment for every single guest. Probably a large portion of them it will be, but there are so many other moments in the show that they will be able to connect with. And so instead of focusing on that one main event, we need to focus on, in my opinion, all of the other little elements that could be a defining moment for someone, but you're not going to know that until it kind of happens. So when we're looking at the experience and as a leader, how can we create an experience? It's not to me about focusing on that one main thing, whatever that means for you, that one main event, let's say, but it's about creating as many opportunities as possible for defining moments to happen, to occur. And you don't know, or your employees are coming from different backgrounds, they contextualize things in different ways, they have different skill sets, different knowledge. So it's not up to you to focus on one moment that you think is the defining moment, but how can we create as many opportunities as possible for that to happen? So when I talk about leadership, that's the experience. That's kind of what I'm referring to.
And it totally makes sense. And I love your analogy, because as you were telling that story, so I live in Las Vegas. I've been to many Cirque shows, but I've also been to other shows, because guess what? I mean, obviously pre-COVID, but they're in my backyard. They're on the strip, right? And this has never happened in a Cirque show, but I can tell you, I've been to concerts before where, yes, the concert itself, as you said, the show itself was exceptional, fantastic. The parking, getting out of the parking afterwards took as long as the show was. And we came home and we were just deflated. When we left the show, we were so happy. We were so filled with excitement. We were like, this was the best show ever. By the time we got home, we were like, oh, I'm never going to a show again.
Yeah.
And it's exactly to your point now that artist had no control over the parking situation because they're playing in a casino. You know, it's completely up to that casino to figure it out. But it's all wrapped into the brand. Do I want to go to a show again at that casino? No. Or I'm taking a whole different strategy. We're not taking the car. Like, we're going to park the car somewhere else and we're going to, it creates a whole different thing, right? So I totally got your analogy on that. And I think anybody who's ever been to a show, especially a concert, somewhere where there's a lot of people gathering, that whole parking thing and getting out after the fact can really make or break the whole experience. And so
Absolutely.
To your point, it's all these other supporting pieces going on. And just another quick anecdote, because when you then translated it to the workplace, I was thinking back to a job I had, and this is, gosh, we're going back like a long time now, 15 years ago. I had just started with this company, and I started with them at the beginning of October, and they had a big Christmas party shindig, and they handed out bonuses. And so the party itself was a big event, right? It was, for all intents purposes, a show. But what really stuck in my mind for me as a new employee, yes, it was nice to get my check. It was nice to get my bonus and be called out. But what really stuck in my mind was the moment when I went over to see the partner that I worked for, and his wife turned to me and said, "You're Alex? I've been dying to meet you. We've been hearing nothing but amazing things about you in our house." And I turned to the partner that I worked with and I said, "Really? Because I'm not aware that I'm doing a good job."
Wow.
So really nice to hear from your wife, Bill, that I am. And so that sort of speaks to experience on two levels, right? Not only was that the big takeaway for me in that moment of that night, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a great job. Nobody had told me that from when I started in October to the Christmas party in mid-December. I had to find it out from my boss's wife. And so that was the defining experience for me that night. But it speaks to every day that I was at work for 2.5 months, nobody was giving me feedback. And that is part of the experience, right? And how we communicate with one another, as leaders, as peers, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were telling that story, I was telling a story, you were thinking of a story. Now you were telling your story, and I was thinking of a story when I worked on a cruise ship, and I'd never worked on a cruise ship before. I had no idea, even though I got in there and started really strongly, just because it was almost like a mini Cirque du Soleil kind of on the sea in a way, in terms of operations. But my biggest struggle as the leader of this team was the management of the ship, and just maritime management in general, I felt was extremely archaic. It was very male driven. It was very ego driven. It was very much stuck in a time before I existed, I felt like, just in terms of strategy used in leadership. And so here I was trying to create an incredible experience for my team because I was their leader and we were the entertainment team. So, it was fun. It was a fun environment. Yet the experience that my team had with other departments on the ship, especially kind of in the general management departments, was terrible. And so me, I had this huge, huge range of, they're having a great time with me and they're feeling inspired and they're getting into the things that I'm leading. And of course, I knew nothing about crew. It's my first time. So I kind of went in naive, but that's how I wanted to go in, because as soon as I felt this dark cloud of this old school leadership, I wanted to do something about it. But that was a big challenge for me, because when I think about the experience of my team, I don't want them just to have a good experience with me as their leader. They need to have a great experience on their entire contract. And this is an environment where they're living on the ship as well. So it's not like they go home at the end of the day and that's kind of it. So it was this interesting moment. Again, if we talk about the experience and how can we create as many opportunities as possible for defining moments, it can also be quite challenging when you have to work with other different partners, other different departments, other companies within your workplace dynamic that are not on the same page as you. And I think that is where, when we think of positive leadership and we think of what we can do as an inspiring leader, that's really where we have to, put our feet down and really put the work in, because it's incredibly challenging. But again, if we focus on how can we create as many opportunities as possible for defining moments for our team, then I think that's a great way to kind of at least start that journey, lead those conversations, kind of get into the motivation of your team and help them succeed, right? That's your goal as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And here again, so you raise an incredibly pertinent example, because we don't work in silos anymore. I mean, we're always working cross department, and so tell us, like, how did you navigate that? Because here you are, you're a newbie on the ship, and you're young.
Yeah.
And yes, you're leading your team, the entertainers, and they're all happy with you because they know the gig. I mean, you're operating from that sort of Cirque du Soleil brand and all the rest of it. But now you're realizing, okay, but the rest of the ship and the way it functions, like as you described it, it's sort of this oppressive cloud. How did you, or what did you, I should say, maybe say, like change the dynamic there, or what steps did you take to try to make it a better experience for your team as they were interacting, and hopefully, of course, a better experience for the other departments interacting with you, right? Like, we wanted to go both ways. We're not just trying to do it for ourselves and our own team. We wanted to, roll out and have a ripple effect in a positive way. So tell us about how you navigated that.
I found it incredibly challenging. It's the first time I felt as a leader that I was really up against something that I felt was immovable. I wasn't able to change it. I wasn't able to have an influence on it. It's been done this way for 100 years. It's kind of a very daunting thing to be kind of slapped with. And I think what I did, and again, because I'd never been in that environment before, is I led with curiosity. And what I mean by that is, there were so many rules that I completely disagreed with, or that I thought were completely useless or counterproductive to what we were trying to do. However, they were the rules of the ship, and every single company on the ship, every brand that was there, every department had to follow these rules. So as much as I hated a lot of these rules, I led with curiosity, in the sense of, I tried to find out why these rules were in place and what the impact of basically not following them was going to have. And so even if I didn't agree with them, at least I understood them, and at least I understood why they were happening that way. And of course, me being, like a leader that's not afraid to kind of put my opinion forward, a lot of them I challenged, and said, is this necessary? Yes, we've been doing it for 100 years, was basically the answer that I got for the most part, which was incredibly frustrating. I was thinking of like the Titanic, and that's like my frame of reference when I think of like a cruise ship, back before time. But so, because I was curious about it, because I did the work and actually asked the questions and understood, when I was relaying that information to my team, when I was sharing with them different things that we had to implement, at least I was coming from a place where I was able to answer their questions and at least show them that, yeah, guys, come on, this sucks, but this is why we have to do it. And this is the image that this is going to create in front of the guest, because obviously the guest, the passenger on the ship, are our number one priority. So if we're all able to follow this rule, I know, guys, it's annoying, like we don't want to do it, rules around mobile phones and stuff like that. But just let's think about it from the guest point of view, and so I tried to lead with that kind of a conversation. So I think I found a lot of success in that, just in terms of the respect that I received from my team, and also the conversations that we had. It didn't feel, as much as I felt the environment was very kind of authoritarian, I didn't feel that the dynamic in our team was that way, because we were collaborative, we were asking questions, we were feeding off each other's experiences. There were people in my team that worked for me that had done contracts for 10 years. There were other people that it was also their first contract. So I think that would be my answer, is really leading with curiosity, even if you don't 100% agree, like deeply understanding why that certain rule, that certain procedure is in place, So at least when you have to then share that with your team, that you can come at it from a place of knowledge and understanding and even empathy in a way, if you're able to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I mean, I think that is a fabulous strategy. I mean, leading with curiosity is so powerful. And it's so powerful for any difficult conversation you have to have ever, right? So,
Right.
I mean, we're talking in sort of the parameters of your specific situation there. But, you know, leading with curiosity, when you have to have a difficult conversation with a peer, with an employee, with a boss, you know, leading with curiosity. We don't talk about politics on this show, but, you know, the reality is that the United States is a very divided country these days, and people continue to just, you know, clamp down and have nothing other than what they believe to say. But even those conversations, which seem to be almost impossible these days, if you enter with curiosity and respect, I think that's the other thing I would add. But I think respect is kind of built into curiosity for me. They kind of go hand in hand. If you just come from curiosity, it can open the door to a real conversation, to an authentic exchange, and as you said, to much greater understanding of like, well, why have they been doing it like that for 100 years, right? And whether or not you agree with it, at least there's a rationale that we can understand then, and that we can work with, and that we can, you know, at least respect that that's what they believe, and that's what they've been following, and that's their way of doing things. And now I know why, and that's good, and that helps me. So I love that. Yeah, curiosity, powerful, powerful tool. And as always, anything that's really effective and powerful, so simple.
Yeah.
You know, we make it too hard. We make it too complicated, right? And these tools, these strategies are often incredibly simple to get us where we need to go.
But I think that you learn through experience, right? Like I could sit here and tell a first year manager all about curiosity, but until they actually kind of dive in and make mistakes and ask the questions and ask the wrong questions and the right questions, they're not going to appreciate that probably as much as we do as kind of seasoned leaders. So it's all through experience.
Well, as my husband likes to say, how do you get good judgment? Bad experience.
Yes, I agree.
You know, or, you know, the good old adage of you learn the hard way. But, you know, hopefully as we share these stories, we share, you know, some of our learning. Some people don't have to learn it the hardest way, right?
Exactly.
So tell us more about, I mean, you really have a fascinating story. I mean, when you worked at Cirque du Soleil, you trained and worked with teams in 17 different countries. Now that has got to be a whole cross-cultural challenge, right? Like you have got to have had to be culturally competent. So tell us about that. Like, what was the training experience like when you had to continually change cultures, and I'm sure languages as well, right? Like it's, even if you didn't change language, you're still changing culture. I mean, it's all happening wherever you go, right?
Yeah. So I am incredibly grateful. I will always be incredibly fond of that experience that I had, because it was basically like a leadership playground for 10 years, because we changed cities or countries depending on the territory that we were in every 6 to 8 weeks for the most part.
Wow.
And the way that it would work, to give the listeners kind of an idea of the dynamic, is we worked with hiring agencies. So sometimes at some points at Cirque du Soleil, we had a global contract with one particular hiring agency. Other times it was more localized into the country, depending on laws, et cetera, et cetera. So we would go into a new, let's say a new city. We would physically set up the tents, you know, as I'm sure like lots of people have kind of seen in the news and YouTube and stuff like that. And then we would receive our team. So we would do a lot of prep before we arrived in the city, but we would receive our team. And then we would usually receive them on the dress rehearsal, or if there was no dress rehearsal, the premiere. And so we had about 4 hours to train these guys, and then they would begin work. And that was it. So it was this incredibly quick.
That needs to be effective training. Yep.
It needs to be effective training. And also, you know, I think if there's any managers and leaders listening in a service-based industry, it's very similar, right? Like a lot of the times you need those guys to get on the floor immediately. And so there was that dynamic. First of all, it's like this quick turnover of training to actually running things. Now, I loved that because it meant that my training was going to be applied immediately. So the learning curve was actually a lot smaller than if they would have done these couple of trainings over a few weeks, and then finally they get on the floor, but they've forgotten about everything they learned in the first week, you know. So it was this really quick turnover where you could actually give feedback and give coaching immediately.
Powerful. Yep.
So that was an incredible dynamic to, as a leader, to learn how to coach in that way, and to learn because also the first night that everyone is new is the premiere of the show, which is the most important night. It's almost like counterintuitive, right?
No pressure. No pressure.
Lead up. Yeah, there's no lead up. It's just like, and go.
Yep.
So it was this incredible dynamic of in that training environment. Now you have that. Now we're adding another level on top of that, another layer of the culture. And like you mentioned, in some places it was the same country, so it's slightly easier. Although, you know, to your point before, if you're touring in the United States, it is completely different in each state that you go to. It's not similar at all. The commonality is the language. You could say.
And that's within one country, right? Never mind changing countries.
Exactly. For the most part, I was touring in Europe. So I was actually changing countries every 6 to 8 weeks. And so it's very interesting when you're looking at training, because the way I would train a North American team is not how I would train a team from Belgium, a team from France, a team from Australia, although Australia and the States are a lot more similar than European countries. So I learned that actually the hard way, as we were talking about before. I learned that very quickly, that the strategies that I had learned in my leadership journey as a trainer did not apply to some places. And they would look at me with these eyes of just like, we are not doing that. And it was a very interesting learning curve of, okay, that doesn't work here. Why? And again, we're going back to curiosity, right? Why does that not work here? Instead of going as a leader, why aren't they doing what I'm telling them to do? They're not into it. My training is amazing. They should be. Instead of that mentality, which I think a lot of leaders, because it challenges your ego, a lot of leaders will naturally fall into. It's like, okay, this isn't working. Why? And then you start to get curious. You start to ask the questions. Nobody does, you know, customer service that way, or the guests are going to hate that, or this and that. So that's why I say it was a playground, because I learned so quickly what works in some places and what works in other places. So you have that cultural level. Then you're going to add language on top of that, where our staff, for the most part, always had to speak English to some degree. As managers, most of us could speak a couple languages. So for the most part, we were never in an environment where we could not really communicate. But again, generally the question of the language was in the interview, I'm sure, do you speak English? And then they say yes, and that's kind of the test. So we definitely got very different levels of English speaking, which is fine. But again, it's okay, if they're not understanding what I'm saying, how can I say it in a different way? Or maybe how can I show it? Or maybe who understands? Maybe we can kind of like demonstrate that. Or so it's really interesting, again, leading with curiosity. So that was basically, if you take that, now you've done one city and you're like, nailed it, awesome, like my team were amazing, and then boom, you change cities and you almost start all over again.
Yes.
Until you learn. You know, I went back to a lot of places, back to a lot of countries. Like you said, that cultural intelligence, I learned that naturally over time. So now when I go into a new country, I have a very good idea of how I want to tackle it. But again, it's, you know, some things that I remember this one time I created the most incredible incentive program. I was running the merchandise. Most of my experience was around VIP experiences, but at the time I was running the merchandise, the boutique. And I created an awesome incentive program. I was so proud of it. I was like, this is one of the best things I've ever created.
I'm laughing because I know there's a but coming.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a story if there wasn't a but, right? So it was amazing. We increased our sales per head. Like, it was great. Then I get to the next city, which we changed countries, and it bombed. It bombed so bad. Like if there was a cartoon, there would be the explosion and then the falling off the cliff like thing. And I was so shocked. Like, I'm like, no, but wait, this is amazing. Like my team last city even told me that, like, what is happening here? And I learned it was a cultural thing. They didn't want to be all about that. They weren't interested in that. So I had to learn, okay, I had to ask questions and then say, okay, well, I really want to create an incentive program for you guys and for us as a team. What can we do? And
yeah, what do you care about? You might not care about what I did in this incentive program, but what do you care about? Yeah.
And from that moment forth, that was probably about 3 years into my touring. From that moment forth, my reliance and my reliance on my local staff and how they wanted to be led and what mattered to them and their insight into the guests, because they're local, the guests are local for the most part. They go together. And I really had to take a step back as a leader and say, okay, I have a certain set of expertise. The Spanish people is not one of my expertise, but I literally have a team of 15 people standing in front of me who are Spanish, who can give me the most incredible insights if I'm willing to listen. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a very long-ended way of saying that it was this incredible playground of learning cultural differences, of learning language differences, of learning even different demographics of people. Sometimes my team were built up of a bit of an older team. Maybe this was their second job. They needed to make rent, that kind of scenario. Another team was made up of like people that just really wanted Cirque du Soleil on their resume. It was their second job. They were 19, they were in university. And so learning about all these different kind of dynamics from a cultural, from a motivation, purpose-driven point of view was, I mean, wow, even just saying it now, like it was incredible. It was an incredible experience.
It's fascinating. It's just fascinating to listen to you. And I mean, I really commend you on being, putting your ego aside, because you mentioned that. I mean, a lot of leaders, when confronted with, look, I have developed this amazing program, I know it's amazing, and then it doesn't work. I mean, it's really easy to let your ego get in the way, or at a minimum, even if it's not the ego, to take it personally. Like, or, go the other direction of like, what did I do wrong? I'm a horrible leader. I mean, oh my gosh, like I'll never lead anybody well again. And then you didn't have that reaction. You didn't have the ego reaction.
I mean, I definitely had that reaction of I'm a terrible
but
leader.
But only like, briefly. But you didn't let you. Okay, so
the switch. Yeah, that was
all right. Fair enough. So the little negative Nelly voice in your head came in.
I'm human, everyone. I am human, everyone.
He's human. Good. It's good to know that. But you didn't let it win out. You realized that, okay, I can take a step back. And this is another key part that I think is so important about leadership, is that we don't have to have all the answers. Leaders think that we do. People get put in a leadership position and they think, I got to have all the answers. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And if you behave like that, the people who work for you are not going to be very inspired. As you discovered, Caroline, as you described so articulately just now, is the people that were standing in front of you had the answers.
Yes.
And you were open and humble enough to ask and listen and implement. I mean, you really, I mean, it's beautiful. I know that you obviously, you said, I learned the hard way, it's trial and error, but you were willing to do those things. And I think that that's, when I see leaders, like if there's one thing that I could impress in them, is the idea that you don't have to know all the answers, and just listen to people. Be open to letting the people in front of you help guide your leadership. Again, it's really simple, but it's really hard for people to do that. So kudos to you.
Yes.
Kudos to you.
I don't know if I ever would have felt so passionately about that had I not gone through that experience myself. But, and again, a lot of it for me was cultural. When I was in Russia, I was in Moscow for 3 months. I don't speak Russian except for maybe like 3 words. And my staff did not speak English. So I had a translator with me the entire time. And so I had to, that was a huge lesson in listening to my team and listening kind of for double the amount of time because of all the translation that's going on and then the miscommunication. And I was, Russia, it was the first time I'd ever been there. Like I had no, except from what I'd learned, and I'd taken time to do a lot of reading and a lot of, I wanted to learn about the culture, but obviously like I had no idea till I really got there. I needed their guidance. I could lead them in the sense of my expertise in leadership and my expertise at creating experiences in our guests, but I needed their guidance in how to lead them in a way that was conducive to their environment and what they were trying to achieve. Because I was standing in front of people that I had no idea really about their motivations. I couldn't even communicate with them. And so,
well, and it brings us full circle back to the link between the experience you create for your employees translating into the experience then that your customers, you know, have, and then building your brand. Because obviously, if the people that are working for you are having a better experience, having good experience, guess what? They're going to execute on their job well. They're going to perform better. They're going to, you know, have a happier face if they're, you know, front of the shop dealing with clients, you know, face to face, that kind of thing. And that, of course, as you mentioned, builds that brand. I mean, you almost come full circle with that whole piece.
Yes. And, you know, I'll add to that. I've had this realization in literally the last 6 months where, okay, I was focused on the experience and I was focused on the guests. And this is now in the last 6 months, I've really, you know, I'm working independently with different companies and different leaders. So I was very much focused on the guest and the journey of the guest through the brand or through the experience. Being a full-time traveler, I mean, I was obviously with Cirque du Soleil, I was already seeing a lot of cultures, but now, you know, I'm traveling. I'm currently in Montenegro. And so being able to witness as a guest kind of what goes on. And here in this particular country where I'm at, I don't find a lot of, there doesn't seem to be a lot of engagement. It's very much work to live mentality. And that's my own personal opinion from my experience here. So I thought to myself, okay, wait a minute. If the employees look, let's say, miserable, or if they're just like if they're just going through the tasks to get through to the whatever time they finish. If I focus only on the guests, I'm going to get nowhere. Okay, I need to start focusing on the employees. Okay, great, employee experience. So then I started to kind of shift a little bit and focus on that. Okay, the experience of the guests, well, that comes from the employees because they're the ones that are having that one-to-one contact. And, you know, I focus specifically on like service-based industries as per my experience and my expertise. And then I started to look at that again and started to think about my experience in all these different countries and think, okay, wait a minute. You can have the most amazing employees. And this is something that I've seen day to day here. I'll come across the most amazing waiter who's just so awesome and nice and just made my whole experience. But if their leaders are terrible,
right,
you're not going to get anywhere. So now I've gone like, I've kind of gone back, and now I'm at the leaders, you know? And so it's this really interesting journey. And exactly to your point, it starts with that leadership environment, who then create the employee experience, and the employees then create the guest experience. So you have to have that full circle. And so I really learned in the last 6 months that, okay, I'm not going to focus on the guests. I need to focus on the leaders. And in a lot of these service-based positions and companies that I'm working with, it's young people that are coming up in leaders. They've shown a lot of potential, but then sometimes they get to that leadership role and then what? They're learning from what they see around them, which a lot of times is not a good thing.
Right. You know? Amen to that. Amen to that. Oh, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I could continue this. I keep talking to you all day, Caroline, but we do have a podcast, so we will when we finish recording, but really, this has been fascinating, and we have barely scratched the surface of your expertise, of your stories, of how you can help companies and individuals. So tell us, I know that our listeners are going to want more of you. I have no doubt. So how can they get in touch with you? You know, how can they listen to your podcast? And also, I believe you have a leader course at the moment, a leader training course at the moment that is really helpful too, right?
Yes. So I'll start with the experience creators, which is conversations that I have on YouTube with incredible experience creators from all over the world. And this is really about how can we think about our experience, the experience that we provide, no matter who are the people that we serve, in a different way. So I have all sorts of guests I just interviewed someone who her company was Conscious Catering, and it was around food. You know, I've interviewed a personal branding expert. I've interviewed an entrepreneur coach. I've interviewed all of these different people from all these different industries, but the commonality that they have is that they create incredible experiences. So those are really interesting conversations then. And oftentimes, and I think that we don't acknowledge this enough, but oftentimes we learn more from outside of our industry as opposed to within our industry. Yes. And so that is what I'm trying to achieve with the experience creators, is how can you take someone from a completely different field to yours and then tweak it, you know, make it, change it a little bit, and then apply it to what you're doing. So that's the experience creators on YouTube. I'm having a blast doing it. I'm personally learning a lot myself. And then a course that I've just launched is something that is just so dear to my heart. It is called Leading a Great Experience, and it is specifically designed for up and coming managers. So managers let's say within the first 1 to 3 years of their leadership journey, specifically in the service-based industry. So we're talking events, we're talking shows, we're talking cruise ship, we're talking hospitality, we're talking travel, hotel, any type of service-based industry that kind of touches the guest one-on-one. And the reason I created this is I saw this gap of, what are we doing, like I just mentioned previously, for those young leaders, those leaders that are just stepping into these leadership roles? They're clearly there for a reason. They've clearly done something incredible to get there. They've showed potential, they've showed initiative, they've been creative, they've showed that they can handle difficult situations. But oftentimes, especially in service-based industries, it's so fast-paced that you kind of just have to go, you know, and you don't really have the opportunity to develop as a leader and learn leadership skills from people that have been before you, have gone before you. And I created basically the course that I wish that I had when I started out. And that's why it's like my baby. That's why I'm so passionate about it. That's why I'm just so in love with it, because I just wish that I had something like that when I was starting out. And, you know, the course specifically touches on 3 main areas: leading yourself, obviously the most important, leading your team, and then leading your guest. So it really breaks down those 3 kind of. I love it.
Where can people access it, Caroline? Where can they get it?
Yeah, so they can, my website is filled with all of this information. So it's carolinemaley.com. And then the course is .com/leadership. And so that's where they can access that course. And so if you're listening and either you're an up and coming manager, or you're an executive, you're a CEO, you're a founder, and you have these incredible young new leaders that are coming up, and you don't have tools in-house, or you don't have the time in-house to actually help them develop and grow, this is the perfect kind of introduction to incredible leadership for them that will hopefully they'll be able to pay that forward for many years to come.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And for those of you who are just watching, just listening, Caroline, her name, which is her website, is spelled Carolene, Maley, MELI. Okay, CarolineMaley.com. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show, Caroline. I mean, you have shared such tremendous wisdom today, from the, you know, lead with curiosity, being willing to be humble, listen to the people who are in front of you, help them, or allow them to help you be a leader. I mean, it was such powerful, powerful wisdom that you shared. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. This has been awesome. And I think my final statement word would go back to that original phrase that I said at the beginning, and that's: one great experience has the potential to change someone's world. So as a leader, lead with that inspiration, and it can just change so much.
Yeah. And that, yes, excellent inspiration to finish. I love it. I'm going to write that little mantra out so that I remember it. I love it. So thank you again. And thank you, of course, to our listeners for joining us for this episode. If you have positive leadership stories, to share. If you have questions about this week's topic, or you just want to get in touch with Caroline or access her website and her leadership course, but you weren't able to jot down, how to spell her name quickly, I can connect you. Don't worry. Any of that, just shoot me a note at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you, and I answer every single email that comes in. All right, that's it for this week's episode. This is Alex Bratty signing out and thanking you for being part of the Positive Leadership Movement podcast and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.